The 29th of September will be a big day. Superstars like Clear Love and Deft will clash with players like Yankos and Forgiven. In the same group, INTZ carries the hopes and dreams of the fifth largest country on the planet, Brazil. And with me here today is the coach of INTZ. Welcome to the show, Alexander Abaxial Haibel.
Hello.
So, how are you and what are you up to right now?
I am good. The players are off doing some filming at this precise moment, but other than that, daily routine is just scrims, doing research, thinking about the game, all that good stuff.
Seems good. So, it hasn't been that long since you qualified for Worlds through the wildcard tournament. So, what have you been up to since you qualified?
Nothing special. I mean, we get a lot of congratulations from fans. We get you know, a little bit of celebration, but daily life is kind of the same as always.
Yeah. So, what was it like to qualify through the wildcard tournament? Was it a big surprise for you, or how did it feel for you?
Uh, it wasn't a surprise. I mean, it was, the expectation. We had, it was definitely a great feeling. It was harder than we expected, but, I suppose some things are always harder than they should be. It's just one of those things. On paper, we should be, just a better team than Dark Passage in three of them, but it ended up going 5 games. Just how it is.
Yeah. So, I guess you and the team, you've been like practicing for the regular season, then you had to practice for the wildcard tournament, and now you're practicing for Worlds. Like, it's a pretty long period without a lot of rest for you, right?
Yeah, the players, I mean, we've had days off here and there, but for the most part, it's been pretty nonstop for the past 9 months. We haven't had more than a week off in that time.
9 months is a long time there, so can you just walk us through how a regular day is during the training season? What it looks like?
Sure. Um, the players wake up usually sometime between 11 to 12:30. We start scrimming at 1 o'clock. Scrims used to be around 3 o'clock here, but we moved them a little earlier in the day because the league is also relatively early in the day. So we scrim from 1 to 4 and 5 to 8. Then after that, it's mostly free time. We have someone to stream after 8 o'clock while everyone else also plays solo queue. I do research. I review the day's games. I, plan for the next day. And yeah, sometimes we have discussion during the free time. Sometimes we don't. It's just sort of, who's in solo queue or what sort of mood people are in.
Yeah. And does the infrastructure look like for the team? Do you have a gaming house? Do you have a big support staff?
Our support staff has been growing. I have one main analyst. I have a volunteer analyst. I've had a few others come up while I've been at since we've come to Worlds. Have a few more helping me out. We have a nutritionist, we have a psychologist, and you know, they all do their part. That's good.
Yeah, that seems pretty cool actually that you have all those things to supporting the team. So seems nice. You've been practicing for almost 9 months straight, but with a little bit of rest, as we said. Has it been hard to find motivation to go on for such a long time of consistent practice?
The players have struggled with it a little bit. It's true. They've all been doing this for a while. They're all experienced now. Something is only fresh or new one time. So you have to sort of find new places to motivate yourself, if that makes sense.
And that's your job, I guess, or how's that going?
Mm, it goes okay. It's partly my job, but it's partly the psychologist's job. It's partly everyone else's individual job. There's only so much I can do to reveal to someone what's already inside them.
Yeah, I see. So I want to talk about Brazilian esports because it's something I don't think a lot of people are too familiar with. So how long have you been involved with it?
I have been in Brazil for a year and a half.
Have you always been coaching for that time?
Yes, for that whole time.
Okay, seems cool. So I think what most people think about, like when they hear Brazilian esports, it's like Kaboom, Pain Gaming in Worlds, maybe some Mordekaiser memes. I don't know, but it's a huge country. It's a lot of potential. How big is it in Brazil esports? Do the average person on the street know what it is?
I wouldn't say the average person on the street knows what it is, but there were, if I recall correctly, 2.1 million viewers for the last CBLOL final. And it was a pretty big deal. You know, you even had like celebrities watching and stuff like that. I believe the population of Brazil is somewhere around 200 million. Now, obviously, not every single one of those 2.1 million would be in Brazil. There'd be some foreign watchers, but that would seem to imply about 1% of the population watched it, which is, you know, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a big market here. And I don't think a lot of people fully realize just how big it is.
Yeah, I see. I mean, when you log into Twitch, sometimes there's like the top streamers on like League of Legends on Twitch are Brazilians who are streaming in Portuguese and everything. So
Hmm.
there, it's really big and a lot of potential, I think. So something I was curious about actually is how is like the infrastructure in Brazil in terms of internet and computers? Do like people in general have the ability to play games online, or do you know how that is?
Well, it depends what part of the country you live in. Brazil is obviously a big country like the United States. Fortunately for Brazil, a lot of the population is centered around the Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Curitiba, that sort of area, towards the middle south of Brazil, which is where the servers are. So for us and a lot of the other people around there, in Sao Paulo, we get 9 ping. In the surrounding area, it's usually around 20 or so. So that's really good. I
Yeah.
think the United States has a much bigger problem with that. They have significant population on the west and the east coast. So they put the servers in Chicago and nobody's happy. So that's nice. The mm, Other than that, there's a lot of fans. We have some off-season shows and stuff like that where we do a lot of fan interaction. And I don't know if I haven't been a coach in the United States, so I don't get to see what fan interaction in the United States is like. But I think it's pretty well done in Brazil. I think a lot of fans get access to us.
That's pretty cool. So, is it like they can meet you after you play the games, or how did the fan interaction work?
Not during the season. The weekly games, it's not like the studio isn't open. We don't have that yet, unfortunately, not like NA or EU. But at these other events, people get an opportunity to meet us. We do signings and all that. Also, I think a lot of Brazilian teams are very active trying to engage their fans. There's a lot of weekly content from them in terms of videos, both like documentary style stuff in the style of, Fnatic or TSM or whatever, but also, smaller, more lighted-hearted stuff, just like answering questions. I think there are a lot of teams that, put a lot of effort into that here in Brazil.
So, if you're looking at the development over time, how much has it changed during these 1.5 years that you've been living there? Is it growing?
It's growing. The viewership numbers keep going up. I think the fan interaction, that stuff I've been talking about, I haven't noticed that really changing, but it's good. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, as they say in English. So
Yeah. Yeah, that seems cool. I just did a quick search on Facebook right now for like the Facebook likes on your pages, and I see you have more likes than on Facebook with INTZ than most of the NALCS teams. So I think it's definitely an area of the world that's kind of going unexplored for esports.
my players, I think Revolta and Yang. I think Revolta's over 100K on Twitter. Yang and Macau are like somewhere like 80K. or something like that.
Yeah,
So, you know, those are good numbers.
that's pretty cool. So you often hear people talk about like the different metas, so the Chinese meta, the European meta, maybe. What is the Brazilian meta like? Do they have like Brazilian teams in general? What's their way of playing League of Legends, in your opinion?
Brazilian meta, very lane focused. A lot of junglers like to gank at level 3 to the point where when we went to our European boot camp early in the spring, this is like, March or so, we went there and our players actually weren't used to getting level 3 ganked anymore. Then we came back to Brazil and they actually died to ganks for like a week. It was very strange because in Europe, the jungler plays more against the enemy jungler than against the laners. But in Brazil, they just like level 3 gank. They don't care if they get behind, it's
Yeah.
just it's a different focus. I think in Brazil, depending on the team, some of them like have weaknesses with team fighting. Others have weaknesses in terms of macro lane assignments. So I think those areas of the game still have development to do. But in terms of laning phase, a lot of Brazilian teams are not bad. They, just purely on that, they can hold their own with decent teams.
Yeah. Seems cool. So another topic I'd like to talk about is you as a coach. So there's been a lot of like topics going on between what should a coach's role be, how much power should a coach have compared to the players, for example. So what is your coaching style in your own words?
Hmm. I think most of all, I am adaptive. That applies a little more to strategy than my overall authority within the team. But in terms of what sort of information I deliver to the team, the sort of research I do, that actually has changed a lot over my career. I've just sort of reinvented myself over time as the needs of the team has changed. I mean, I don't need to keep repeating the same thing over and over again for a year. That's, completely stupid. And the players learn, the game changes, so on and so forth. In terms of what you're probably really asking, which is, my authority, I am not an authoritative coach. I'm not a passive coach either, but, I mostly interact with the players as an equal. And unless they really, unless I really feel strongly about something, I allow them to make the final call during draft as to, what champion they want to play, stuff like that. So, should a coach have complete authority? It depends on the team. I think some players aren't really like proactive or, envision their own role that well in the team. Some players are just sort of like, you know, focused on their individual play and mechanics. They don't really think about the bigger picture. You might say, for an easy example, someone like Uzi,
Yeah.
he doesn't really,
I see
he
what you
doesn't
mean.
really think about the big game that much. So those players, maybe you do have to step in. You do have to say, okay, this is the pick. This is why I want you on this pick, so on and so forth. And if your arguments are good enough, they'll agree, and that's that. Um, Other ones, will argue back with you and have reasonable arguments. So maybe they win the argument sometimes, and so
Yeah.
that's that. Um, mm, yeah. So, but it's not as if I'm completely passive and I just like say, okay, that's my opinion, and then I just sort of turn around and leave.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any coach that's really like a completely authoritative coach or a completely passive coach. I think if you're a completely authoritative coach, that means you have five, no brain players, which probably means your team isn't very good. And so you need to train them up to the point where at least some of them can talk back to you. Like, if your players can't talk back to you, that means they probably aren't that smart about the game yet.
Hmm.
And no matter how good you are at your draft and giving them directions before the game, they still have to play 30 to 40 minutes without you. So they better be smart in some way. You
Yeah,
haven't taught them to be smart, then
yeah, absolutely. So I think a pretty recent example of this in my last interview I did with Fnatic Klai. He used to play support for the team, and he talked about Deilor's importance, that he respects Deilor a lot as a coach, but some people weren't too happy with what he did, and now he has left Fnatic. Like, meanwhile, being a lot of people talk him up and says that he has a great coach and everything. So I guess there's like you have to keep a balance between the two things.
right. So Daylor, I have heard things that in terms of just like pure game knowledge, Daylor wasn't really all that, but I do respect that, you know, he walked the walk, he talked the talk in terms of being authoritative, disciplinarian, to a degree that I am personally not. But, Daylor said, you're not going to look at your phone before bed. You're going to go to sleep on time. You're going to wake up. You're going to, eat lunch. I think at this time, so on and so forth,
Yeah.
having a very regular schedule. I think a few of the things I heard I disagreed with, but overall, the big picture, it's good. And, I think honestly, all teams should be like that. The necessary condition, though, is sort of that you have to start it from scratch. That, a player is not used to an old system with freedom. And the other one is that you give the players enough separation between the personal and the workspace. Because in professional sports, yes, there can be, this disciplined environment. You do this at this time, blah, 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 blah. But the players also have a personal life in the off time.
Hmm.
Esports isn't quite like that. Esports, you're expected to train for 10 to 14 hours a day sometimes, which, you know, there's sustainability issues with that, but also, you know, you can't be disciplined on someone for that period of time. They have to have somewhere private, somewhere where they can hide away.
Yeah.
And implementing that sort of discipline in a gaming house situation as opposed to separate living, it's it's tough.
Hmm.
That's the only thing I can say about that, really. While I think Fnatic had trouble getting someone with enough game knowledge in to help the players. And I think, maybe, okay, read between the lines, it's Febiven. Maybe Febiven, would only respect someone that had more game knowledge. I do think Daylor had a lot of good ideas in terms of this is how you should take care of yourself.
Yeah. I think he had a lot of stuff that makes sense for me. I think Klein mentioned like not drinking sodas during practice, like is sugary drinks, and not then they have to go out running. I think a couple times a week and stuff like that. It just makes sense if you want to perform.
Yeah,
To me.
I mean, sure. Sugar actually isn't very good for you. So
Yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly. So with that talk about coaching, I want to start to talk about worlds because that's the big thing coming up for you, obviously. So the first subject I want to get into is before we do the predictions is the situation for the wildcard teams because I've heard opinions differ a lot from like, oh, Brazil's been doing well in the last two worlds. Maybe they should get a direct spot to worlds. To like, yeah, wildcard teams should just walk over, so you have no chance of doing well. Give the spot to a proper team instead. What's your take on this?
Hmm. Well, let's uh let's look at the games. The Kaboom win in 2014. Partly fluke, partly Alliance having some weird holes in their game, but yeah, probably mostly a fluke. The 2015 Pain performance, I think Pain showed a fair number of good performances there. However, I think they were also helped by lane swaps. Brazil in lane swaps was actually pretty on pace with like NA and EU. So against Korean teams, Rocks Tigers against Taiwanese teams, Flash Wolves. Payne actually was able to get pretty big advantages early game off lane swaps. However, those have been removed from the game, and there was catch up anyways. So uh, there isn't really that sort of thing anymore that they can just go up 2-3K early game. Um, so how good are we? How good is the rest of Brazil
Yep.
compared to major region? I think we are about, we're like a mid-table NA or EU team in terms of LCS. I'd say like we wouldn't. It depends on the patch. It depends on the meta. It depends on what sort of draft we get. Like we can beat top tier teams, but not super consistently. We would not when we scrimmed in Europe. We scrimmed some big name teams, but we never got like over a 50% win rate against them. So, mm, does Brazil deserve a direct spot to Worlds? Well, I think so. I think for us to get one slot when NA or EU get three slots is pretty reasonable. Um, Now, do other wildcard regions also deserve a spot? Turkey probably does. Maybe you have to go on a case by case basis, but I think there's reasonable arguments for it. The only problem, of course, is that there's 16 slots at Worlds currently,
Yep.
and I don't know if you can reasonably bring it up to 20 or 24 teams without diluting the experience, kind of. So, I'm not an expert on that, but I think the gap isn't so big that they deserve three and we deserve none, basically.
Yeah. I get your point there. Would you like to expand on that point? Why would you would compare to a mid-tier LCS team?
Well, I think in NA and EU at the very top, they have some, really strong mechanical players who have been, sometimes imported that have played solo queue at the highest level and stuff like that. I would say Brazilian solo queue is a little harder to improve in. It's not as good of an environment. People are more content to, just play the same style every game, whether it's champion or just like, playing the game the same overall way. They don't really learn as much. They, just they just aren't as good in solo queue.
Yeah.
But that doesn't even have to do with talent necessarily. It's just how much the people care about the game, how much they're sort of inspired to improve. Where so if you want to be a good player in Brazil, you still can, but you have to focus a lot on your own gameplay. You have to do research, maybe see, like maybe look at Korean solo queue, look at a few players, how do they play the laning phase. You have to, just really be self-focused. When you play solo queue in a bigger region, you can play against good players all the time. And so it's a little more in your face, like, oh, I made a mistake. I got punished.
Yep.
In Brazilian solo queue, it's like, oh, I made a mistake, but I didn't get punished. But if I'm a really smart, if I'm a really proactive sort of player, I can sort of understand that I made a mistake anyways. So, um, there's some players in Brazil that can compete at the highest level, but it's not that many because it's a more challenging environment.
Yeah.
I think so. There is some drop off after the top teams, and my players do prefer EU solo queue when we've had the chance to boot camp in Europe.
Hmm.
So I think that plays a pretty big part. There's also scrims, which have the same sort of relationship where it's easier to improve in scrims when, people just beat you up and, show you what you're doing wrong. It's still possible to improve with scrims against weaker opponents if you have some idea of what you're doing. If you have idea that, oh, we could be doing this better, blah, 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 blah. But it is harder.
Hmm.
So the whole
Yeah.
picture in Brazil is that it's still possible to improve, but it is harder compared to being in a big region.
So if a Brazilian team would maybe like I don't know, move to LA or Berlin and start playing from there, you think they would have better conditions to actually improve?
Yeah, probably. Um, I don't think just uprooting would be all that comfortable for the players, but I think I mean that's what they do in Counter-Strike, right? The t team once Luminosity, now SK, they practice internationally and they became the best team in the world. So, yeah, sure. Uh, you know, it depends on the players whether they'd be comfortable living in a foreign country, whether they'd you know, adapt to situations well. Because sometimes, yes, there's certain players in Brazil that are maybe like a little coddled by the environment and, wouldn't actually do that well internationally, whereas they, sort of hold their own here. But overall, I would say most teams here, if they uprooted, would probably improve.
Yeah, so just thinking this may be a stupid question. I'm just asking it because I've been living in Europe all my life. Would like scrimming and solo queuing to NA from Brazil actually be a feasible option, or what's the ping like?
Nah, it's somewhere between 150 to 200-ish.
Okay,
It's not possible.
yeah, that's really bad. A reoccurring segment in my interviews that I want to do is that the guest gives their honest opinion on a number of players. And for you, I couldn't make up my mind on who I'd ask you about, so you get to choose. You can choose between your own players on INTZ and break them down all individually, or the biggest star players in your world's group.
Mm, I don't want to rate my own players.
Okay,
So I think we have to talk about the world's group. Okay, fine.
sure. So I've prepared just 5 players, and I want your opinion on them. The big star players of your group. So let's start out with Deft.
Deft. Hmm. Okay. Deft and Mako are good in lane. Deft is obviously a very good player mechanically in terms of when to flash, how to dodge skill shots, positioning in team fights overall. The There's not a lot you can really nitpick wrong about Deft. I think in terms of laning phase, maybe he doesn't, punish people quite as hard as he could, but even that's like a hard argument to make. It's just like sometimes like Uzi would quote unquote snowball harder, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Deft is the best ADC in the world. Uh, I can't, you know, it's really hard to, come up with anything that is wrong with him. When we see him play against Forgiven and Vander, we will get an idea on his laning phase because I think other than Uzi and Mata, you know that's probably the best spot lane in the world.
Yeah.
I'd say those three are probably the best. Mata, Uzi, Forgiven Vander, Deft, Mako. I don't think Double F Biofrost are as good as those three. So yeah.
It's a bit tough for you then because you got 2 of the 3 strongest bot lanes in the world in your group.
Mm-hmm.
So we can just move on to Forgiven then because he's also on my list as we're talking about it.
Sure. Forgiven, H2K are not as good at team fighting as EDG. Um, is that Forgiven making positional mistakes, or is that his team not playing properly around him? That one's complicated. I think it's a little bit of both, but more around his team. I think. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Sure.
In terms of laning phase, he plays it a little differently from Deft. I think his mentality for the laning phase, he gets ganked a little bit more, but his 2v2 mentality, I think, is a little bit better. The the Forgiven mentality is very sort of PvE focused. Like, I'm always going to get the push. I'm always going to, use every single auto attack I can on the minions. and then I'll trade with you after I've already secured minion advantage. Um, I've never, from scrimming against them in Europe, I've never seen a team put quite that much pressure on your turret in laning phase. Forgiven and Vander will take every single opportunity they get to either push the lane or attack your turret.
Yeah.
So, when you see HDK play, they get a lot of turret first blood spot because, they'll just chunk it down to halfway in laning phase. That's not something I see from Def's play
Okay.
that Forgiven has.
Yeah, and Thirst First Blood is going to be really important, I think, now with the recent changes.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, with the bonus gold. So the next player on my list is Westdoor.
Mm. Well, a lot of people have been saying that Westdoor hasn't really performed lately, except on TF. He does play a good TF, but that a lot of his signature assassins, mostly he just kind of loses lane and has, kind of average team fight impact. I think it's a hard meta to play his champions. I think, yes, he doesn't play like some other, more control mages all that well. And that's just, kind of how it is. the, I don't have a ton more to say than that. Uh, Perhaps his laning phase will be better at Worlds, but as of right now, it does seem like he has some trouble keeping up. He's still a good player mechanically and in skirmishes. How good you are at laning is not something necessarily connected to your raw mechanical skill. It's also about strategy, understanding, when you want to push the wave or what someone can do from this position lane. So that is a related but separate skill to just like, can you click fast or can you predict where he's moving, stuff like that.
Yeah. I see, sounds good. So I have two players left, and those are two junglers. Let's start with Clear Love.
Okay. Some people say he's the best jungler in the world. I rate a few others a little higher than him, but he is obviously very good. I think that his communication with his team struggles a little bit when he's not playing an aggressive early game jungler. So when he's in the river, when he's trying to invade, his communication is very good. When he's playing something a little more passive, if you look at the series against World Elite, for example, he was playing Hecarim. His team has more problems. Now, whether that's a clear love problem or a team problem, that one's complicated. But and I can't really tell you. But there seems to be an issue there. Also, just looking at Clear Love's playstyle, I don't think he's actually an engager. I think he uses the rest of his team to engage and create fights. And that's a fine style for China, where a lot of the teams are really aggressive and they just come at you all the time. But it could be not the best against some other more passive teams internationally. Maybe.
Mm,
Um, you know, that's more of a stylistic thing than an actual weakness. It's just how he plays. He just, stands in front of the other team, waits for them to try and engage.
yeah. Okay, so let's go for the last player on the list. It's Jankos.
Okay. Yankos is obviously a very good player, has great mechanics, does a lot of cool stuff early game. He's had that First Blood King title for quite some time in Europe now. Um, H2K, as I've talked about earlier, don't always have the best team fighting. Yankos is part of that. He's a very aggressive player, but it's not just him. I think the rest of the team is also really aggressive when it comes to engaging too. So sometimes they do it at the wrong time. Um, I think Yankos, he's got a bit of a reputation for tilting. I don't know if that's completely fair, but he is, you know, an emotional player. We've seen him in scrims where sort of he'll try to respond to what you do. If you invade him, then he will try to invade you.
Yeah.
either in that same game or the next game or whatever. So, you can sort of see that in his play that he's, not always playing, just this is how I think it's correct, but he's more responsive to
Hmm.
what you're doing. So maybe that leads into the sort of tiltiness thing. I don't really know, but I'm always sort of skeptical about, armchair analysts, Reddit, just saying, oh, this guy's a tilter. You don't really know what's going on in a team to make that judgment.
Absolutely.
So,
That is true. So those were the five players on my list, and the last segment I was thinking about is let's just predict the 2016 World Championship.
okay.
I was thinking we could start with with your own games in the groups.
Well, I don't really want to predict my games, but I would say that uh, EDG will probably finish above H2K, who will finish above AHQ. Where we will fit in that, I will decline to comment. But I think H2K have every bit as good of an early game as Edward Gaming, or even slightly better. But I don't think they can snowball hard enough to win through with team fighting. I think EDG are really good at playing against aggressive teams, and so H2K needs to snowball really perfectly to beat EDG. As for AHQ, I don't think their early game is very good. I think their team fighting is fine later in the game. They also skirmish well when they get the opportunity, but I don't think they'll do too hot early game against EDG or H2K. I think they should lose against both of those teams.
Hmm. Okay, so no comments on INTC esports there in the groups.
Well, I can't be impartial. So
Okay, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. So let's just go through all the groups, I think, because that was a pretty clear prediction for Group C. So Group A, what are you thinking? Rocks, Tigers, G2 Esports, Counter Logic Gaming, and Albus Nox.
sure. I predict Rocks will finish first, G2 will finish second. I think in terms of how we match these teams up, I think Rocks and G2 are actually relatively close in terms of overall skill, but that Rocks have a good matchup. In particular, the top lane is something that's going to be a problem for G2. I don't rate expect very highly. I rate the rest of G2 really highly, but I think that particular matchup, Smeb is considered the best player in the world, is going to be a little tough for G2. Also, G2 are like a fine team fighting team, but sometimes Perks kind of trolls them. So I don't think they can really make any mistakes in the team fight against Rocks. Otherwise, they're just going to lose. So even though I don't think G2 are really that far away from Rocks in terms of overall level, I don't think they'll win. Now, CLG, I think CLG are actually kind of similar to Rocks in terms of play style. Not incredibly similar, but somewhat similar to the point where CLG probably have a bad matchup against Rocks because they're just not as good. They would have a better matchup if they were a different team from Rocks, if there was sort of some asymmetry going on. But because they're like Rocks, but a little bit worse, it's tough for them. I
Yep.
think CLG might be able to get a game off G2 then, because I think CLG are also a slightly better team fighting team than G2, and Darshan should have an advantage over Expect, but stuff could change over the next month. But I can see CLG taking a game off G2, but I think G2 would win in the end, even if it needs to be like a tiebreaker game. And G2 probably has a better chance of taking a game off Rocks than CLG, even though I think Rocks will go undefeated, but we'll see what happens. As for Albus Nox, um, honestly, on paper, Albus Nox would have a better matchup against Rocks or CLG than G2, I think. I think one of the best parts about Albus Nox is their bot lane, but it's not actually super great in lane. I think the real star power on Albus Nox is on the two solo lanes. Well, sorry, people talk about Liquid, and Liquid is a good player, but he doesn't have the best laning phase with his ADC. Whether that's him or the ADC, that's debatable. But strictly in lane 2 versus 2, they can struggle sometimes. So, but I think, for example, Smurf actually is a player that's improved a lot over the past year. Their top laner for Albus Nox. I actually think if he doesn't get ganked, I think he'll actually stay within spitting distance of Smeb, like within 10 CS or so. I don't think he'll
Yeah,
actually get solo killed 1v1.
that's saying a lot.
Um,
Seeing we talking about Smeb.
yeah. Um, so I respect Kira too, and Kuro isn't like the greatest 1v1 mid laner in the world. So Albus Nox are not going to get like crushed in laning phase by either Rocks or CLG, but I think against G2, who have Sven and Mythi, a very strong bot lane, I think they could have some trouble dealing with that. Um, Now, that's just talking about the laning phase. Albus Nox have a particular style for the rest of the game in terms of mid and late game, which I don't really want to talk about. It's complicated, and I don't want to screw with their chances too much. But whether other under teams like sort of understand their style and give them the opportunity to play that in the draft, um, that does a lot to determine whether Albus Nox have a chance or not. I think, and it's not just like GP Jin, which is the impression you might get from watching the series against Lion. Okay, they have a few more
Yeah.
other ways to play their style,
Okay.
but uh, if they get their style, if they get the picks they want, or they have a chance against some of the other teams. I wouldn't put it as like a big chance, but it's doable. Nox can win if other teams underrate them, don't put in the necessary research. Um, it also depends whether Nox pick the best comp for themselves. I think they don't always do that. And that's not meant to be an insult. Like a lot of teams actually don't really fully understand what the best picks for their style are, and so will make draft errors because they don't just have a complete understanding of themselves. And that's not just like a wild card thing. Like many famous teams also do this too. So I don't think I'm like knocking on Knox by saying that.
Yeah.
But I would say the draft matters a little more than it usually would for Knox versus the other teams. So end of the day, I predict Rocks in G2.
But you're saying Nox has decent chances of taking a game, or how should I interpret that?
Um, well, it depends on the draft, but I think it could go anywhere from like a small chance from 5-10% to if they get a really good draft against CLG or maybe mostly against CLG. If they have a decent draft against CLG, I maybe give them like a 30% chance to take a game.
Hmm. That's pretty cool. But in the end, we're saying Rocks and G2 from Group A.
Yes.
Okay. So the natural thing I think would be to move on to Group B after that. So what are you thinking here? Flash Wolves, SKT, IMA, and Cloud9. It's a group where opinions have differed, I think, on the predictions.
I think Cloud9 are very strong. I think they're going to keep improving after what they showed in NA, where they were okay but not amazing against TSM in the final. I think they're going to continue to improve. I think Cloud9 are actually going to finish first in this group over SK
Wow.
Telecom or Flash Wolves. Yep, yep.
Really?
Um,
Cool.
mhm. I think as for Flash Wolves versus SKT, historically Flash Wolves have actually had a good matchup into SKT. They play mid jungle synergy really well, among other things. Um, that said, do I think they'll pull it out this time? Or I think I give SK Telecom the uh, the nod for second place. I think SKT have better chance of taking a game off Cloud9. I think Flash Wolves are more likely to drop games to, the other teams in the group. Maybe they can drop a game to IMA, depending on how things go. Um, SKT, if they play really horribly, could also drop a game to IMA, but I think they would. I think they're consistent enough to get second place in this group.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it goes Cloud9 SKT. I think IMA can take games off Flash Wolves. I think maybe they have a shot at the other two teams if things go well for them, but it's hard. I think they're a little like KT in that they're not the greatest of laning phase teams, but they're good at sort of finding a way out of it. That between like the jungler, when to attack. This is how we'll get out of laning phase. I may are good at making those sorts of plans, but I think that's not going to be quite enough for them here.
Okay, but I think the big story there is predicting Cloud9 over SKT. Do you think it's just like Cloud9 are that amazing coming out of NA, or do you think SKT is kind of weak compared to what they've been doing? Because most analysts that I've heard trying to break this group down is saying that SKT are the clear favorites.
Yeah, SKT, obviously they have synergy issues with Blank. He's not always the greatest on some of the ganking junglers. If he can invade, then cool, wonderful. But he seemed to perform better in sort of like the MSI meta with like Kindred, Graves, Nidalee. Now, Graves and Nidalee are going to be in the Worlds meta as well. But, you play the early game a bit differently now. And Blank doesn't seem to be really comfortable with that. Now, Meteos has also received his fair share of criticism, but I think Cloud9 are pretty good at playing on the same page overall. They have respectable team fighting. And, SKT's communication just looks off. I've never really rated Wolf all that highly. And so, between Wolf and Blank, it just feels like they're not really coherent on the map. They're more sort of a team that'll just punish your mistakes rather than being proactive and finding their own way to win. And that's kind of always been the SKT style, just sort of hang back when the enemy team makes a move on the map, we'll respond. But they don't, they haven't really been able to make it work that well recently.
Yeah. Seems cool. So you're going with the American pride there, choosing Cloud9.
Yep, C9 SKT.
C9 SKT, cool. I guess we've already talked about Group C as much as you'd want to, so let's move on to Group D and finish this out.
Okay. This is obviously a very hard group to call. I think one of the biggest questions is how good will Splice be coming in? Because Splice have improved a lot lately, but some people say they don't really have good individual players. That one's complicated. Ultimately, I think that I'm going to rate Samsung as number 1, TSM as number 2, and Splice at number 3, Royal at number 4. My reasoning. I think that TSM have the best individual players in the group, but that their macro is not really that special. I think they're very well practiced. They're on the same page in skirmishes. When they say, okay, we're going to fight here, everyone's like ready to follow up, all those, little things. You get everyone to play together on a team. But in terms of where to move on the map, where Sven is in relation to everyone else, I don't think they're actually that good at that. I think, it's not, it's just sort of like the basics. So I think Samsung used to actually not be that good a macro team either, particularly when they were playing Wraith. But they've improved a lot on that area, and they also started using Core JJ instead of Wraith. And from what I could see during the Gauntlet series against KT, Core is a very smart player. He has good roams. He initiates the right fights. He also, even though I think Wraith has better mechanics, Core gets caught less. So I'm really big on Core's play right now. and I think he's a large contributor to Samsung now having pretty darn good macro. So, and I think that's what's going to make the difference more than individual play. So, I think Samsung will finish first in the group over TSM. I think Splice are a solid team, and they also have good macro ideas. But I think they won't quite get it done. Yes, I will rate a little bit of what people say about their individual players. Although Mickey X is a pretty darn good Bard player, among other things. Uh, I think, yeah, they'll have trouble keeping up in laning phase and the like.
Yeah.
We saw this in the H2K series where sometimes they could neutralize the early game against H2K, but there were also two games where, and then they would win, but there were also games where they had trouble in the early game and they just got snowballed on out of control. I think it's a little like that. As for Royal, I don't think they're really that good a team in terms of, you know, map strategy. I also think, like Looper isn't really that great. Um, but yeah, I just think they don't really know how to play as a team right now. And this isn't a meta where you can do that or pull that off. I think Samsung is going to, and Splice will punish them hard on macro. Maybe they can brute force like a laning phase win against Splice, but I don't really know. They can maybe get a game off someone else too. But I don't think Royal are going to finish higher than third. And I actually think Splice probably match up better with the other teams. I think Splice will pull out third.
Yeah. I mean, Royal, just looking on paper, their players are so impressive, but you don't think their like raw skill in the laning phase is going to be able to outmatch the likes of Samsung and TSM?
Uh, yeah, I think the laning phase. I mean, again, people have gotten a lot smarter about early game since the lane swap changes that, you can't lane swap anymore. You've had to plan out for standard lanes a little more explicitly. And, I don't think Royal are really good at like these, early game plans for the first 10 minutes, that a lot of good teams, even if they don't have the best laning phase, they can still like I was talking about with KT earlier, that they can still find ways to survive or outthink the other team in laning phase and win anyways. Like sure, this maybe this guy's gonna get like a 10-15 CS lead in laning phase, but if you know the right window to gank him, if you pull that off, then I mean it doesn't matter. You're still gonna get the kill. You're still gonna win laning phase. And I just don't see that from RNG.
Yep, seems good. So we're ending up with Samsung first and TSM second in this group.
Yep, that is correct.
Seems cool. So to finish out the prediction, I want you to name the winner of the entire thing and a dark horse that could surprise.
The winner of the 2016 World Championship, INTZ Esports, and the dark horse is Rocks Tigers. Probably the other way around. But okay.
Okay, let's go with that. It's really good. Thank you. So thank you very much for the interview to get your view on things. To finish out, do you have any final shout-outs you want to make?
I would like to thank our sponsors, especially NVIDIA and Logitech. They've given us a lot of help lately in terms of our European boot camp, paying our flights to the United States, all kinds of other cool stuff. So thank you very much. They even gave me a new keyboard recently. It's a 10-keyless one, so I have more desk space. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our fans who are always wonderful to us. We even have some new ones now that we finally made it to Worlds. It's okay to be an INTZ fan in Brazil. So all of you, thank you very much. Please continue your support. We'll do our best at Worlds. And thank you for conducting this interview.